Greetings. Thought it might be a nice time to talk about the sourdough starter. I've been teaching baking classes for quite a long time, teaching people how to make sourdough, and we call them mindful and intuitive classes, throwing on fancy spiritual buzzwords or whatever. But the truth is, baking can feel really intimidating, and it can feel like it's only meant for the few masters. And I want to break that taboo and help people to realize that people have been baking bread for thousands of years, long before technology existed. And it's the simplest thing. Literally, making fresh bread is the simplest thing you can do once you understand the basics. So when people come to our house and they take a class, they're amazed often by their perception of making bread versus the reality. Because the reality is, if you can mix flour and water and some stuff and turn on an oven, you can make bread. And I've figured out a way to do this. Now, you can go online, you can watch videos, you can read books, and people have, all these detailed and a million different steps and things, and it feels so intimidating because you read it and you're like, what? That's going to take me all freaking day. But I found a way and distilled the sourdough process down and found a way to basically make bread with about 10 minutes of active time. So if you've got 10 minutes in your day, the rest is mostly just waiting, right? You're just waiting and you're chilling. You're letting the dough do its thing, right? Fermentation is this thing that happens when we set the right conditions. Even if we don't set conditions, fermentation is happening everywhere. Have you ever had a pineapple start to go, bad in the fridge and you smell it and it's kind of like, whoa, well, it's starting to ferment, turn into alcohol, because microbes and yeast, they exist everywhere, all over food, in the air. So once we've captured them in our sourdough starter, the journey can begin. So this is your sourdough starter. And if you have a starter and you can maintain your starter, you can make sourdough, because everything happens on just bigger scales of basically what this is. So a starter is just flour and water that over time, these microbes that are necessary for fermentation and yeast have found their way in here, and now they have a home. And you can see all that stuff bubbling in there, right? And I'll show you, this starter was fed, and you can see the difference, right? This one, I just fed it and then dumped it out to make bread. This one, I fed and it's just chilling. So you can make your own starter, and it's a whole process where every day you're basically adding flour and water, dumping half out, adding more flour and water, the next day dumping half out, more flour and water, and after about a week it's going to start to bubble, which is super cool. If you're on a deserted island or you're in a place where you can't get one, do that. If you can get one from a friend, all they need to do is feed their starter and give you a little bit. A tablespoon or two will honestly do. A lot of local bakeries, like we live by Moxie Bread, an amazing spot in Boulder where they make their own fresh sourdough daily. You can go there and they give out free starters. If you live nearby, hit me up if you want to come get one. If you come to a class, I give out starter. But basically, every morning I wake up and my starter is about here, and it's, maybe a couple tablespoons. It's just kind of at the bottom of the cup. And I feed it, and all I do, and I'll show you. What the heck? I'll show you right here. Add some water. I eyeball everything. That's the other thing to this, is that you can follow measurements and stuff, but every dough, every bread that I make is totally different because I'm just improvising. And I found a way to do that, which to me keeps it fun, right? Because you make a bread, someone's like, wow, this bread's amazing. How did you make it? I'm like, I don't know, you better enjoy it because it's gone. And that comes a lot from my Buddhist days. I used to be a Buddhist, practicing Buddhist for many years back in the New York days. And something that really I walked away with was this whole, just mindful way of being, where things are impermanent and we appreciate them and love them now because they'll be gone. So with food, it's an act of impermanence. You create the art and then you destroy it by eating it. So, I added about a quarter cup or so into my starter. Feed it with flour, and you can use any flour that is glutinous, right? So there are gluten-free starters people can make, but for the sake of sourdough, we're getting on with the gluten. All-purpose, I tend to use all-purpose or bread flour as a base because it's also more affordable than buying like nice whole wheat, and we have a mill, so we actually grind our own flour daily. But all-purpose is nice, just works easy, but you can totally use whole wheat, rye, kamut, einkorn, anything you want. You can use a mix of them, and they just need flour. Just keep in mind that if you're feeding your starter different flours, they might react a little differently, take different amounts of time to rise, maybe require more, which is why I like to look for consistency. So I basically just keep adding flour into here until I get a consistency that's like a thick pancake batter, right? I'll show you guys this in a second. Mix, mix, mix. Now I have to use a chopstick. Shout out to my brother, Life by Mike G, for that tip many, many years ago. Okay, so look, now I filled this. And you can tell the difference, right, still. One is like, thicker and starting to rise. This one's still a little bit thin, but it's like a thick pancake consistency. And I like to use a jar this size. Some people use bigger jars, and everyone has their way and their method. And when you go searching for sourdough methods, you're going to find a million. This is just one. But we're in Colorado, so high altitude baking, it's a thing. And I found a way to make it work pretty easily. So I like to fill my jar up to about half. And that way I know that when it doubles in size, I'm ready to bake. This one is almost there, right? So when it gets to about the top, and it doesn't have to be perfect, but when you've noticed significant rising, you can see all the bubbles on the outside. When you've noticed some sort of significant rising, well, that's a pretty good sign where you can go on to the next step. And the next step, we're not going to do the whole thing. I literally actually just did it, and I was like, maybe I should make a video. But the next step is making this. This is just me taking about 3/4 of my starter, dumping it in here, adding water, and I eyeball it, but let's say you add 3 cups of water, add some salt, which I forgot. Oh my lanterns. Salt it up. Let's get some salt, let's get some salt, let's get some salt, let's salt it up. Gotta get my special mixer. Ooh, that was loud, sorry. Bread whisk. Here we go. And if you come to one of my classes, you just get a detailed kind of look into this process, but I'm going to give you guys some right now. All right. And I like to add about that much salt. And mix it in. So normally I would do this before I added all my flour to make the salt much easier to mix around. But hey, just the way she goes. And if you want to actually get funky, you could like dissolve the salt in some water. But yeah, we're just going to pretend that that all went in. So what I do is I dump in 3/4 of my starter, I dump in my water, I dump in my salt, I dump in my flour, and I do usually a mixture of all-purpose or bread flour with some things like rye, or akmelinka is a flour I've been using that I got from a friend. I've been grinding up. Mix that all together, and then once it's mixed together, I just let it sit for about 30 minutes. And this is what's called, there's an auto-lyse period, where the bread just rehydrates. And at that point you have some options, right? You can either just say, you know what, I feel pretty good about that, and you can just let the bread chill and do its thing. Or you can start to work it. So working it to me looks like getting my hand just a little bit wet. I'll take you guys down to Chinatown. Okay. And just going like this. Now the cool thing about sourdough, unlike making dough with yeast in a packet, is that you have a lot more time. So the dough kind of works itself in a sense. So I can do this, but I don't have to really knead it. I'm not like doing this whole intense kneading process to try to strengthen the gluten and smooth out the dough. I'm just kind of playing with it, loving on it a bit. Everyone again has their method. Some people take it out and they do this whole slap and fold thing. But sourdough can get messy, so I find until I really need to, which is the period when I actually go to shape my bread, there's no point, right? All I have to do is just kind of keep it in here, work it a little bit for a few minutes. Now I've made bread where I've literally skipped this step, and guess what, friends? Still tastes freaking delicious. So if you don't have the time, and you can literally just feed your starter once it rises, which I didn't mention, takes quite a while. It can be 3, 4, 5 hours for this to double in size. Now, if you don't have that time, guess what? You feed your starter, you dump 3/4 right in, you mix your dough together, and just know that it's going to take longer because your starter is not going to be so active. But there are ways to continually minimize the process. I talk about it more in my book, Fermenting with Your Best Friend. I could go on and on about bread. But the point is, if you can wake up, and I like to always go over the process again and again and again, get in your head. All you're literally doing is you're taking this living thing that you feed every day, and yes, if you aren't making bread every day, you can feed it once like this, put it in the fridge, and it will stay for months, potentially a few months in there, and then you can take it out and feed it and start it back up. But I bake quite often, so I leave it in the counter every morning. I feed it. If you forget to feed it one time, not a big deal. Feed it the next day. If it's not active and you kill it, you can go get some more. Don't be discouraged. But all I'm doing is I'm feeding this around equal parts flour and water. And once it rises, I'm dumping it in here with water, more flour, and adding some salt. And this is also the part where you could add in other things like sun-dried tomatoes, mushrooms, cheese, pesto, whatever the hell you want. And then you work this a little bit, right? And then I'm going to let it sit on the counter to proof. And basically it's going to rise and ferment for, you know, again, just like your starter, it's going to double in size or so. So I might let that sit on the counter for, I don't know, 3, 4, 5, 6 hours, depending on the temperature of my house. The hotter things are, the warmer, you know, the faster ferment happens, the slower, the colder. So in the winter, it might slow down. Things change, stay in the flow. And then once you have that, you've got options. So this is an example of dough that has been, I'm going to get my bench scraper, don't go anywhere. This is dough that's been fermenting, right? It doubled in size and put it in the fridge and it's just been chilling. When things go in the fridge, fermentation slows down. And honestly, that's where a lot of the magic happens. And all we have to do is get this out, which, you know, ideally once you get it started, it will plop out itself. Here it comes. Here it comes to save the day. Right, and this is dough that's fermented in the fridge, like I said. Maybe it needs a little help. It's a little shy. It's okay. You got it. You can do it. You can do it. It's all good. Okay. So look at this. What do we have here, folks? My hands are sticky. So this is dough that has been fermenting for a couple days. Right. You can see it's a little more fluffy. It also is like a more whole wheat dough, so it might be a little bit more, you know, thick and what have you. I'm actually gonna, oh boy, man down. This is what happens when you try to film yourself with a phone, and we're upside down now, folks, for the love of Lord. Whoa, that's trippy. It flipped it for me, even though it's recording. And we're going back around. Man, this is why I don't make cooking videos anymore, just don't, you know. All right, so we are going to take this dough here. I'm going to show you guys what I do. So like I said, this dough is fermented. It's been chilling in the fridge. And all I have to do is shape it. And there's a million ways to shape it. But really, the intention, you know, some people like to roll it up like a joint or something. Right? I could just do that. Look, that took me 2 seconds. Right? But if I want to make a round loaf, I just kind of roll it into a ball using some tension on the table until I get that. Boom shakalaka. That's all she wrote. And look at that. We've got a delicious ball. I've got this little one here, which I can do the same kind of thing. The wetter your dough, the harder it is to shape, but you know, it can also be more fluffy and things, so different people like different things. But when I'm first teaching people how to make bread, I really like to do a dough that's not super wet, because it's so easy to shape that way. And I made the mistake at classes before where I have a really wet dough and people can get a little frustrated, which, you know, has its own values too. But look, I just did that. And all I have to then do is take my proofing basket. Oh, I've got some extra flour here I can use for this step. My proofing basket. I get my proofing basket. Hey, hey. You gotta get your proofing basket. Okay, get some flour. This is very impromptu. I did not plan to teach this today. Add some flour to the proofing basket and add some flour to the dough just to help it not stick. And right, once this is sat for a few minutes on the table just to kind of develop shape and crease, I can literally just pop it in here, which then eventually looks like this. Look at that. This dough's been sitting in the fridge a couple days. If you press on it, you'll see it's got a thick crust. You can cover this. I don't like to cover it because I do like the crust that it develops. But if I press on it, you can see that it kind of like comes back, but not too much. And that's a good sign that it's proofed. And then I would just have to bake this. I would literally turn my oven on 500 degrees, plop this down, cut a score on one side so it can open up and rise without breaking, and then I'd bake it at 500 in a cast iron pan, like a Dutch oven usually, for 20 minutes. Take off the lid, another 20 minutes. Sometimes I drop the temperature a little bit, but I've really been enjoying keeping the temperature higher. It gives it a really dark crust. Bake it around 40 minutes until it's about 190 degrees inside or so, or just intuitively feel what's right, and you have sourdough. So I just get into a flow where I make enough. Typically I make this is enough for 2 loaves of bread. So I do this every couple days. And if you're someone that doesn't need as much bread, you could literally do this twice a week and have bread for the whole week. So you make enough dough that you can make 2 of these, and then you bake one. And oh yeah, so I should back up. Once I have it here, right? Once I've shaped my dough, I put this in the fridge until I'm ready to bake. Now I like to let it bake or chill in the fridge at least, overnight, and bake it the next morning. So sourdough technically is at least a 24-hour process, although you could bake it earlier for sure. But in the fridge, things slow down, they chill out, the yeast kind of goes dormant, and then those microbes that are going to ferment and make the bread more sour, hence the sourdough, they're going to work. So the longer it sits in the fridge, the better. Which is why I love doing 2 things, because if I have 2 loaves, tomorrow I can bake this one. The other one can sit in the fridge a few days and get more and more fermented and more sour. The gluten breaks down more, and it's going to just become more delicious. So I can have bread tomorrow and then more delicious bread in the next few days. But however you swing it, that's all you really got to know. Simple. If you want to come to a class, youenjoy.life is our website. You can see our classes in Boulder. I also do online classes, and I'm not going to say it's my mission to teach everybody in the world how to make bread. Plenty of people already know, but if you're somebody who's intimidated by the process and you want to learn, I love to share, because I find it's incredibly simple. We've got it simple because we've got some bread, and we've got sourdough in that bread.